Hello all, myself Dr. Radish. In today's video, I'm going to analyze the poem Some Advice to Those Who Will Serve Time in Prison by Nazim Hikmet. And before I start today's class, let me brief you about today's plan. So I'll begin this class by introducing the writer. Then I'll introduce the poem. Finally, I'll wind up this class by after analyzing the poem in detail. So let me start this class by introducing the writer. As you all know, this poem is written by Nazim Hikmet, and he was born in 1902 and died in 1963. Nazim Hikmet Ran, popularly known as Nazim Hikmet, was a Turkish poet, playwright, novelist, screenwriter, director, and a memoirist. And he is the first modern Turkish poet too. And some people call him as a romantic communist and also as a romantic revolutionary, especially due to his strong affiliation or long-term association with communism. And for the same reason, due to his strong affiliation with communist parties, he was repeatedly arrested, and he had to spend most of his life either in prison or in exile. And his poems, which depict the Turkish countryside, cities, the Turkish War of Independence, and the revolutionaries, are most often celebrated as the greatest patriotic literary works. And he had also won the International Peace Prize in 1950. Now, let me talk about some of the major works by him. The major works by him are I Come and Stand at Everyone's Door. This one, Human Landscapes from My Country, an epic novel in verse, is another one. Things I Didn't Know I Loved is another book by him. The Day Before Tomorrow is another popular work by Nazim Hikmet. Moscow Symphony, this is one of the most celebrated works by him. Selected Poems. Finally, Poems of Nazim Hikmet. So these are some of the most popular works by Nazim Hikmet. Now let me introduce the poem before I attempt an analysis of the same. So this poem, Some Advice to Those Who Will Serve Time in Prison, is included in Poems of Nazim Hikmet, a collection of poems. Poems in this collection were translated by Randy Blazings and Mutlu Kunuk. And as I explained when I introduced the writer, he had spent a lot of years in prison due to his association or affiliation with communism and communist parties. So in that sense, we can say that he had first-hand experience of the life in prison, So through this poem, he offers some technique to prison inmates about how to survive the incarceration, kind of so how to survive the incarceration, etc. And he also tries to provide some instruction to people to overcome challenges that they face in prisons. And when we think about this topic, prison, prisoners, life in prison, we can understand that it's been scientifically proven that long years of imprisonment would result in the depression of prisoners. If one spends a lot of years in a prison, that may affect him negatively, that may have negative impacts on him. So this poem he attempts to address the problems of prison inmates, and it also tries to provide people some tricks using that they can keep themselves away from problems. So now let me read the poem first, the entire poem, and after this I shall take first 20 lines for analysis, and then I'll take the remaining lines for the same. So let me begin. Let me read out this poem for you. Some advice to those who will serve time in prison. If instead of being hanged by the neck, you are thrown inside for not giving up hope in the world, your country, your people, if you do 10 or 15 years apart from the time you have left, you won't say, better I had swung from the end of a rope like a flag. You will put your foot down and live. It may not be a pleasure exactly, but it's your solemn duty to live one more day. To spite the enemy, part of you may live alone inside, like a stone at the bottom of a well. But the other part must be so caught up in the flurry of the world that you shiver the inside. When outside, at 40 days' distance, a leaf moves. To wait for letters inside, to sing sad songs, or to lie awake all night staring at the ceiling is sweet but dangerous. Look at your face from shave to shave. Forget your face. Watch out for lies and for spring nights, and always remember to eat every last piece of bread. Also, don't forget to laugh heartily, and who knows, the woman you love may stop loving you. Don't say it's no big thing. It's like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. To think of roses and gardens inside is bad. To think of seas and mountains is good. Read and write without rest. And I also advise weaving and making mirrors. I mean, it's not that you can pass 10 or 15 years inside and more. You can, as long as the jewel on the left side of your chest doesn't lose its luster. So that is it. Now let me take the first 20 lines for the analysis. So let's begin with the title. The title of this poem reads, Some Advice to Those Who Will Serve Time in Prison. So the very title suggests that through this poem, the poet is going to give some advice on how to get through the prison as easily as possible. So what readers can expect from this poem is of some instructions on how to save oneself or how to get through the prison as easily as possible. So in this poem, he tells the story of prisoners, people who are sentenced, or people who live inside prisons. And so in this poem, he tells the people, or he gives the prisoners some tips, to overcome challenges that they face inside the prison. So we can assume that, we can conclude that the poem is about the prisoners, especially about those prisoners who are not willing to give up their hope in their country, in this world, and also in their people. So this poem is dealing with those people who are unwilling to give up their hope in this world, in their country, and in their people. So instead of being hanged by the neck, you are thrown inside for not giving up. So the prisoners, they are inside, or they are imprisoned for not giving up their hope in the world, your country, and your people. So let's begin our analysis then. Okay. And in the very beginning of this poem itself, the poet says that an inmate, if he is sentenced for lifetime imprisonment, or if he is sent to jail, he should not think that life is better than, death is better than life. Death is better than life in prison. One must not think so. So we can say that, we can analyze it like this: if one is sentenced to undergo imprisonment for many years, here it is 10 or 15 years. If one is sentenced to undergo imprisonment for 10 or 15 years, that person should not think that he should have committed suicide. That person should not think that he should have committed suicide. He should have taken his life. He should have ended his life by hanging at the end of a rope, like a flag that hangs at the end of a rope. So he should not prefer death over life. Even if he is sentenced to undergo imprisonment for many years, for 10 or 15 years, a person must not choose death over life in prison. So here the poet has employed a technique called simile. Look at those lines. If you do 10 or 15 years, apart from the time you have left, you won't say, better I had swung from the end of a rope like a flag. So one should not say that he should have committed suicide. He should have ended his life by hanging himself like a flag at the end of a rope. He should not be saying that. So there the poet has effectively employed that technique, poetic device, simile, to communicate the idea well, the frustration of people well, or sometimes this is how people think when they are sentenced to undergo imprisonment for a long time. They think that it is better to end their life rather than spending lots of years inside the prison. So there the very use of simile, that poetic device, serves the purpose. You will put your foot down and live. It may not be a pleasure exactly, but it's your solemn duty to live one more day to spite the enemy. Okay, so see, he is asking, he wants the inmates, the prisoners, to take a bold decision, a very strong decision. So he is asking them, you will, or you people should put your foot down and live. You must live. You must not end your life. You must take a strong decision to face the life, to face whatever comes in your way. And he also says that you cannot expect an easy life in prison. It may not be a pleasure exactly, which means one cannot expect a happy or easy life inside the prison, or in the prison. Inside the prison, one may not have a pleasurable life, a happy life, or a easy time. So, but at the same time, it is your duty, it is your solemn duty to live one more day. So he says that, but it is the duty of the prisoner, or it is his duty to live at least for one more day. It is his duty to live at least for one more day, to hurt, to annoy, or to offend his enemy. See, but it is your solemn duty to live one more day, which means uh, his enemy wants him to be dead. His enemy wants him to be dead, and we can say that death is what his enemy wants. Therefore, living is a kind of victory. So if his enemy wants him to be dead, living is a kind of victory, living is a kind of resistance, living is a kind of protest. So only by living, only by living he can hurt, annoy, offend, protest, respond, resist his enemy. So he should not commit suicide. Committing suicide means he is fulfilling the desire of his own enemy. His enemy wants him to be dead. Okay, so in that case, he shouldn't be committing suicide. He should not commit suicide. Instead, he must live at least for one more day to offend, to annoy, and also to hurt his enemy. So to live one more day, to spite the enemy, to hurt the enemy. Part of you may live alone inside, like a stone at the bottom of a well. So here the poet is presenting an interesting idea about people who live in the prison. And he says that a prisoner is living a dual life. A prisoner is having a dual life. A prisoner is living two life. He says a prisoner is living a dual life. And he says that one part of you may live alone inside, like a stone at the bottom of a well. So he says that, the poet here says that one part of the prisoner is forced to lead a lonely life. Right, one part of the prisoner, one half of the prisoner is compelled to live a lonely life inside the prison. And the lonely life of the prisoner inside the prison has been compared to a stone which is lying at the bottom of a well. So he says that a part of you may live alone inside, like a stone, like a stone. It is stone, like a stone at the bottom of a well. So he says that one part of the prisoner is compelled to lead a lonely life inside the prison, and that has been compared to the state of a stone that is lying at the bottom of a well. Okay. But the other part must be so caught up in the flurry of the world that you shiver there inside when outside at 40 days distance a leaf moves. Which means, now he is talking about the other half, the second part. So second part of an inmate, a prisoner. So the second half is concerned of what is happening in the outside world, but the other part, the second part, must be so caught up in the flurry of the world, which means the other half, the second part, is really concerned of what is going on, what is happening in the outside the world, or in the world outside his prison. So the other half, as you can see in this poem, is caught up in the turmoil, that is happening outside. And when something happens outside the prison, if you take the next two lines, in the flurry of the world, that you shiver there inside when outside at 40 days distance a leaf moves. So when something happens outside the prison, even in a faraway place, even that place is 40 days travel away from the prison. So if something happens there, something very silly happens, a leaf moves, which means even if something very silly, insignificant happens in a faraway place, in a place that is far and far away from the prison, the prisoner seems to be disturbed of it. The prisoner seems to be aware of it, or the prisoner seems to be disturbed of it. So he says that in the flurry of the world, that you shiver there inside when outside, when something happens outside, even in a faraway place, even that the place where something happens is 40 days travel away from this prison, and even if it is an insignificant action happening there, the prisoner seems to be disturbed of all these things. So here the poet is presenting a very interesting view here, a very interesting perspective. He says that, or in a way we can say that he is insisting on having a larger vision of life in spite of the confinement. In spite of the confinement means now the prisoner, or they are inside the prison, they are confined there, or they are in confinement, but still they seem interested in issues or things which are happening outside. So the poet here is insisting on having a larger vision of life. Okay, now to wait for letters inside. Now we are taking the remaining lines for analysis. Okay, so to wait for letters inside, to sing sad songs, or to lie awake all night standing at the ceiling is sweet but dangerous. And here the poet is saying that longing is something that may have a negative impact on the inmates of a prison. So longing is something that weakens the prisoner. It is having a negative impact on the prisoner. So as longing is something that weakens the prisoner, the poet says that it is not advisable, it is not wise to wait for letters. It is not advisable or wise to wait for letters, sing sad songs, or stay awake in the night looking at the ceiling. So doing these things, waiting for the letters, singing sad songs, and looking at the ceiling in the night, these things are not desirable, are not advisable, are not wise to do, because these may create longing in them, and that may weaken their self, that may weaken them. So instead, and he says that these may be to wait for letters inside, to sing sad songs, or to lie awake all night staring at the ceiling is sweet but dangerous. And these things, that waiting for letters, singing sad songs, and also looking at the ceiling in the night, may seem sweet, may look sweet, may appear sweet, but they are really dangerous, as these may create longingness, or kind of a sense of longing in the inmates. So these are not wise. Then, look at your face from shave to shave, forget your face, watch out for lice and for spring nights, and always remember to eat every last piece of bread. So instead, these things must the prisoners should not do, but he says that the prisoners instead must do the following things. Instead, the prisoner should take care of himself well. A prisoner must take care of himself or herself well, and he or she, the prisoner, must take good care of his or her face. And at the same time, a prisoner should forget his or her age. A prisoner should forget about his age, and a prisoner instead must watch out for lice and spring nights. So instead of waiting for letters, singing sad songs, watching the ceiling in the night, one must take care of oneself well, take good care of one's face, and one should forget one's age, and one also should watch out for lice and spring nights. So, and finally, this is very important, and always remember to eat every last piece of bread, which means he is asking the prisoners to eat as much as possible, and because that is the only way to retain one's physical health. That is the only way to keep oneself fit, to keep oneself healthy, or to in a way to take care of one's health. So eat as much as possible. Whatever you get, every bit of bread that you get, you must eat, and that is the only way, according to the poet, to retain one's physical health. So they must give priority to that too. So and he continues, also don't forget to laugh heartily, and who knows, the woman you love may stop loving you. Don't say it is no big things. It is like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. Okay. Now he says that also don't forget to laugh heartily. By that, the poet means, what the poet means is, it is very important to be happy. The poet says that it is very important to be happy. It is very significant to be happy, as sorrow can kill people while in prison. We also know that when people are inside the prison, if they are not happy, if they are sad, that may affect them negatively. So that may have a very dangerous impact on the prisoners. So he says that one must always keep oneself happy. It is very important to be happy, as sorrow can kill people, as he says that sadness can kill people, especially when they are inside the prison. So also don't forget to laugh heartily. One must always try to be happy. One must always laugh heartily, with heart's content, etc. So, and who knows, the woman you love may stop loving you. Don't say it is no big thing. It's like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. So and he says that while in prison, one's lover may leave him. When, especially when somebody is inside the prison, that person's lover may leave him or ditch him, or his lover may go with another person. His lover may marry someone else, and his lover may leave him forever. So this may happen. It is highly likely to happen. So the woman you love may stop loving you. That woman you may stop loving you. Don't say it is no big thing. It is like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. So the poet says that, so when somebody's lover leaves him, when that person is inside the prison, that should not be taken lightly, as it is an action, as it is a great emotional blow to the inmate. So since it is a great emotional blow to every inmate, if their lovers leave them, this very act of lovers leaving inmates of prisons must not be taken very lightly. And the poet continues, and he compares it to the very act of breaking a green branch, you know. So it's like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. So it's been compared to the snapping, the breaking of a green branch to the green branch. So how a person feels when his lover leaves him, especially while he is in prison, and that very act has been compared to the breaking of a green branch. So there also the poet has employed simile, you know, the poetic technique called simile there. So it's like the snapping of a green branch to the man inside. Then to think of roses, to think of roses and gardens inside is bad. To think of seas and mountains is good. Read and write without rest. And I also advise weaving and making mirrors. So he says that while in prison, it is good to think about roses and garden. It is not good. It is not good to think about roses and gardens. The poet here advises against, you know, advises against the inmates thinking about roses and gardens. Instead, he wants the inmates of a prison or inmates of prisons to think of seas and mountains. You know, here we can interpret this in a different way too. So while in prison, it is not good to think about roses and gardens. Instead, as I already told you, instead one must think of seas and mountains, as seas and mountains symbolize freedom in nature. Right? Some people give or attribute such a meaning to it. Some people consider that seas and mountain here stand for freedom in nature, whereas the former, that is roses and gardens, symbolize for domestic pleasures. Most often roses and gardens are found in domestic place or domestic space, so they represent domestic pleasures. So one must not think of domestic pleasures. Instead, one must look for freedom, and one must think of seas and mountains, which symbolize freedom in nature. And it also says that roses and gardens, since they symbolically represent the domestic space, they also stand for the prisoner's family, and the prisoner's family may stop loving them, especially when they are in prison. They may stop loving them, but at the same time, the people, maybe their friends and their organizations, etc., will always eagerly wait for them. So this is why the poet wants the prisoners to think about seas and mountains rather than roses and gardens. Then, so read and write without rest, and I also advise weaving and making mirrors. So he says that the best way to keep oneself occupied is to read and write. Maybe it is very important to keep oneself engaged, to escape the boredom, and also to escape loneliness, depression, etc. So the poet here identifies reading and writing as one of the best methods to keep oneself occupied. And this, in a way, will also widens one's world. One's world in the sense, inmates of a prison are confined to a limited space. In the case of a prisoner, he is confined into a single cell. So in that case, his world is always limited. But at the same time, if a prisoner is able to read and also write something using imagination, thinking about characters, etc., they in a way can widen their own world. And that very act of writing and reading, where they are employing imagination, they can escape confinement in a way, or they can think beyond the four walls of a prison cell. So this is actually that reading and writing actually are helping, will all help prisoners to widen their world. Okay, so and I also advise weaving and making mirrors. Weaving and making mirrors are other means of keeping boredom away. So poet also recommends weaving and making as other two effective methods to keep boredom away, or to help one to keep engaged in something always. And finally he says, I mean, it is not that you can't pass 10 or 15 years inside, and more you can, as long as the jewel on the left side of your chest doesn't lose its luster. So he finally concludes the poem saying that it is not impossible for, in the case of a person, to spend 10 or 15 years inside the prison. It is very much possible, it is doable, but at the same time it could only people uh, who will never give up. Only people who will never give up can kind of spend 10 to 15 years inside the prison. So he says it is not impossible to spend 10 or 15 years inside the prison, and even more, they can even spend more time inside, more than 15 years inside the prison, only if you know only if their hearts don't give up. Only if their hearts don't give up means, as long as the jewel on the left side, the jewel on the left side metaphorically stand for the heart. So as long as their heart don't give up, as long as their heart don't give up, as long as they show great courage, presence of mind, determination, etc., and as long as their hearts don't give up, it is always possible to spend 10 or 15 years inside the prison. And what is required is that one's heart should never accept defeat, or one's heart should never give up. So such a person who has a heart which will never give up can spend 10 or 15 years, or even more years, or more time inside the prison. It is very much possible. So there ends the analysis of the poem. I hope I have covered all the aspects with regard to this poem. And now I'll try to talk about poetic devices employed in this poem. So I have already talked about the poetic devices, some of the important top poetic devices employed in this poem while I was explaining the poem. So the two major poetic devices one finds in this poem are simile and metaphor. So we have already seen places where the poet has employed the poetic device simile. So in 3 occasions the poet has employed the poetic device simile, and another one is metaphor. It comes towards the end. It has been employed towards the end, where jewel on the left side metaphorically represent the heart of the prisoners. So this is all about what I can offer you as in connection with the discussion on poetic devices. So I have given links here. So if you click on these links, you get to read articles and analysis of this poem. And now it is time to thank you, people. I thank you all, I thank you for listening to me. Thank you all. Thank you.